And we're recording.
We're recording.
We are recording.
This is The Mud Peddlers, a podcast where two nerdy ceramic artists share the behind the scenes of their worlds of clay. We're your hosts, Lindsey M Dillon.
And I am Donte of Earth Nation.
All right, so this week on The Mud Peddlers, we are actually answering a question that wasn't originally intended as an answer to be answered, a question to be answered by the Mud Peddlers, but I did a AMA or Ask Me Anything when I left for my trip for Morocco and Spain. And one of the person's questions I thought was, well, I mean, there are actually really many good, insightful questions, but this one, when I was, we were trying to figure out what we were going to talk about today, I was like, hey, what if we do this? Okay, so this question is from harta.vs. And they say, I hope you have safe travels. I'm just a beginner potter, but I have one more general question. What was one of your biggest Eureka moments when trying to master making a form or trying to create a glaze? And did you get there by trial and error, or did you do a bunch of calculations and thinking? What do you think is the best way to make breakthroughs as an artist like that?
I think those are all fantastic. That seems like three different questions.
Yeah, it's a lot. So.
I have answers for all three.
Yeah.
Lindsey sent me this question, I want to say like a day and a half ago, maybe a day ago, and I immediately was like, I'm in the throes of realizing this right now.
Yeah.
100%.
And for me, I kind of laughed because when I actually answered the question in the AMA, my brain apparently stopped reading at Eureka moments because my immediate reaction was all of these like...
Mine too.
More of like emotional kind of realizations. But I think we can think of some like formation and glaze making Eureka moments. I mean, especially since you've done...
the glaze chemistry courses.
Yeah, the glaze chemistry courses. Yeah.
There's like 3 or 4 little pieces of information that not only have I realized myself, but were passed down to me from the classes that I was like, okay, I'll try that. And once I did, I was like, okay, so that just works for everything? That just makes all of my glazes better until the end of time. Okay, cool.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, well, let's get into some of them.
Well, I want to first start with beginner pottery tips, if that's what we're calling them. The Eureka moments for like starting potters.
I think so.
Can we do that?
Yeah.
Okay, so the first thing that really helped me is that almost every shape on the wheel, most shapes stem from some dimension of a cylinder. Yeah. And I know that's a very basic thing, but once you realize that, then you start concentrating on how to make a good, proper cylinder that doesn't twist, that has the right amount of thickness, is a certain amount of height. You understand the clay body you're working with has a certain amount of long or short work time. And from that point on, you stop caring about like, big, tall shapes, thin body cylinders like the pros. You're just like, man, I just want to learn how to make a really good quality cylinder so that my shapes are standard and my clay is even so it dries evenly. And that was like so freeing for me. Just like, okay, so it's just all about the cylinder.
Yeah. I feel like that's why a lot of beginning classes, not all of them, but a lot of them will have an assignment where it's like make 6 cylinders that are 6 inches tall and, the same width or whatever, and like the cylinder making exercise is definitely a thing because it's,
And then once I stemmed off of like, okay, make a good cylinder, I started to realize the reasons why a cylinder would be quality or not, such as like you can tire out clay based on the clay you're using. Yeah. Number 2, what is
wait, we should go into that just a little bit more, like or just to provide an example, like even though I'm looking at moving away from B-mix with grog because of the whole issue with the 3.5 absorption rate even after it's vitrified, so it's like semi-vitreous instead of like fully vitrified.
Right.
So I'm looking at moving away from that clay, but the reason I like that clay is because if I'm learning a new shape, it can deal with in general, it can deal with my bullshit. Like, it can be stretched and then, like, pushed back in.
Slap it around a little.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I can take it off the wheel, and even if it warps a little as I'm taking it off the wheel, it doesn't stay that warped. And I can work with it for a while before it gets oversaturated. Whereas if you're working with, like, a porcelain, at least it's been a while since I've worked with porcelain, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I kind of feel like porcelain is not the clay you work with if you are learning a new shape or you're gonna be experimenting with the form on the wheel itself. Like, I feel like with porcelain, you gotta go into it knowing what you're gonna make and what hand movements you're gonna use to get there, so that you're not stretching and the clay or contracting it, and then
take your it doesn't take your bull crap. You know what I mean? It just doesn't like... Porcelain, the way I describe it to people who... And there's always... And I know I've talked about this before. There's always the beginner potter who's like, I want to learn how to work with porcelain. Yeah. Because that's like the clay, right?
Right.
And the more experienced potters are generally like, well, no, not really.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, but no, not really.
And there's also... I mean, there's like plenty of... cultural, sociological reasons why porcelain, a white clay body that was associated with
We used to call it China for a reason.
Yeah.
Not to say that it's you can't use it for those reasons.
Sure. And if you do want to, experiment with a shape on the wheel with clay, you can do that. It's 100%. It's just going to be harder. Is really what I'm trying to say. But,
right. And the thing that I always say for people who go down that path, especially beginners who are like, I want to work with porcelain as fast as possible, because that's a modicum of being skilled, right?
Yeah.
First of all, not really. You're going to find someone who can, and please forgive my bluntness here, you're going to find someone who's better than you at throwing with just clay. You're going to find it. You're going to find someone who's using garbage clay, who's using like an amalgamation of like B-mix and redstone and porcelain and half, that's throwing like fantastic shapes while you're blowing your eyes out trying to make sure that you don't get twists in your porcelain.
Yeah, that actually low-key reminds me. That's like very like a Shokugeki, like Food Wars kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Like when he wins the cooking competition. This is an anime, by the way.
Yeah.
Great anime.
It's a cooking anime.
Yeah. And when like the guy, wins the cooking competition with like the discount supermarket. Yeah. It's just like bless. Anyway, so twisting though, you wanted to talk about twisting.
Oh, I wanted to talk about twisting because the second that I realized that twisting is just a factor of friction in between your fingertips in certain parts of the cylinder, it immediately became a non-issue for me. Like the way I think about it is that as you're pulling, your fingers, even though they're hydroplaning with water, are technically stopping a certain portion more over the top part because you're pulling as you go up, right?
Yes.
Of the clay is technically going slower than the rest of the parts that's already been pulled or the bottom parts.
Right.
And if you stay too long on a specific spot or put too much friction on a specific spot, it will encourage twisting.
Right.
This can be kind of, I don't want to say mathed out, but there's variables. They're like the thickness of clay, how short your clay is, how tall it is, things of that nature, what kind of clay you're working with. But moreover, a good percentage of your twisting, if you are getting a lot of twisting, is just like you stayed too long pulling on one spot with not enough water. And moreover, just like the fix to it is to just pull faster, really.
Yeah.
The high majority of the time, just pull faster and with less pressure.
Yeah. So my biggest issue with twisting, which I will still sometimes get, is when I'm pulling the walls of my steins, because those are the largest shapes that I make. And for me, what normally causes twisting is my grabbing essentially too much clay. And so I'm pulling there's a big old chunk of clay on the top part that I'm pulling, and I have that combined with basically making the walls and the bottom section, like underneath my fingers as I'm pulling,
thinner than the top.
Too thin.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing for me. So so twisting is a big thing.
Twisting is a thing that once you understand exactly why it's happening in your clay body, you're like, oh, it's just not going to happen anymore to me.
So that was definitely one of a big eureka moment for you?
Every clay has different variables in which, like, how long or short they are, based on their composition, of course. Because just like glaze, they're made of...
long or short, just in case our listeners aren't really familiar with those terms?
Long being you can, like, stretch it very, very wide. You can work with it for a longer amount of time. And short being the opposite of that, where it's like, I need to pull this in 2 pulls, like the porcelain.
Or it starts cracking and things like that,
Yeah, it doesn't have a lot of give. It can't dry very unevenly. Like B-mix with grog, you can just kind of like leave out until it's dry.
Bless.
It takes so much. Sue McLeod actually just posted something on Instagram. I will try and post it on my Instagram, where she explains why certain clays crack, and she showed like basically the structure of clay.
Yeah.
You've seen it, right?
I have, yeah.
And there's space that is not filled in between, and I know this is wrong, but the molecular structure of like how things are binded to, or the platelets, or how they're binded together. And she was like, yeah, the less space there is in between them, the better the clay is, the more like compounded it is.
Right,
and the longer you can work with it and stretch. But if there's air in between those and it's not filled with something like sand or grog, usually it's shorter and it's more difficult to work with. And she made a whole like post about it. Please go check it out.
Yeah, if I can find because I think she listed, was it in her
Instagram?
It was on Instagram. Okay, yeah, I'll see if I can find the link and I'll drop it in the show notes, because like we love Sue McLeod. If y'all didn't know already,
didn't understand.
Sue McLeod's amazing.
Sue's based on the cast.
Yeah, she is. I don't know what that means.
On
but
God.
actually, I know what based is. Is she the goat?
There can only be like one
that's greatest amount of time.
Yeah, there can only be one goat.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you for keeping me up with the lingo.
It's okay.
Yeah.
But if you meet someone who calls someone else, like if someone's like Biggie's the goat and like Tupac's the goat, they're
because that's like that's the big like they're East Coast West Coast.
They're technically not wrong in any sense of the word, but there is an argument to be had. Okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's definitely.
I hear you.
Okay, I have another wheel related one.
Okay.
Right? Someone said this to me one day, and I was like, "You're right. You're not 100% right, but you know me. I talk in like 90 and 80%.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
The wheel is just a tool for making things round, and anything after that is where my real creative process comes in. Because I can only, it's not really true, but I can get really good at making big shapes and thin shapes and round shapes and certain shapes that are historically relevant and X, Y, and but like at the end of the day, I am making a vessel or something that is round with different heights. Even when you make those little donuts on the wheel, that's just like a half an inch enclosed round.
Right.
You know, but then after that, if I want to make a square shape, I'll take it off the wheel and morph it a little bit. If I want to make something that, you know, where you squeeze both sides together.
Yeah.
Like one of those thin bottles, take it off the wheel, you know. But once somebody was like, yeah, the wheel is just a tool for making things round, but you can modify your work or alter it any way you want after that. Then I was like, oh, you're right. You're so right. He's like, yeah, aren't you just tired of making like round things? And I was like, no, I like that. And he goes, right, but like there's more to life than just like round. Like cups and bowls and plates. And I was like, oh, so you're so... I'm sure I could give an example or two, but I'm also sure there's 100 examples versus that of where you're right.
Yeah.
It's just a tool for making things round. You know? And so I've... within the last month, I've started to expand. Like, okay, we're gonna do some silk screening. We're gonna do some color variation. I've started to experiment with like glazes a lot more.
Cool.
But it was, again, very freeing to just be like, oh yeah, I just kind of make round things with pretty colors on.
Yeah, which is fine. Because to be honest, it's like I did a little bit of experimenting with different shapes, like essentially like throwing and altering the form.
Yes.
But yeah, like in my day-to-day work in the studio, I'd be making the round things.
I'd be making the round things, and then I'd be making the round things thin, and I'd be making them tall, and different parts, and then people are impressed because they go, ooh, the bottom's so round, and the top's so thin. And then tiny piece of paper go on top, bottleneck, very impressive.
Very impressive.
Because kind of difficult. But also still just round. Okay? Also still just round. So I've gotten a lot more into like, oh, I'm going to carve this when I take it off the wheel. I'm going to alter this in some way, shape, or form. I'm going to pound this part in, or like...
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, I am.
I love that so much. Oh, my Lord.
But yeah, once I settled in with the idea that the high majority of the shapes on the wheel that I'm making are just round, I was like, oh, well, I want to be more creative than just round. You know, and that started not to say that that's bad if you just want to do that.
Yeah.
But like I don't know, I want to go beyond just round. You know, and so that was a eureka moment for me where I was like, okay, well, I got to move past that. In order for me to grow as an artist personally, I need to move past round. I need to do texture. I need to do glazes. I need to do altered forms. I need to do something that's not round, because now that someone's pointed it out to me, I'm gonna go crazy just making round. When someone's like, you just make round things, I'm like, oh, you're right, and it makes me angry.
So it kind of seems like so far, you know, since I know part of the question was like, did you arrive at these eureka moments by, I can't remember exactly what their terminology was, but essentially organically versus like making a lot of calculations. So it kind of sounds like so far a lot of it is the kind of organically coming to these like realizations or like people telling you. Do you have any examples of, you know, where calculations or things like that became through direct study you came to the eureka moments?
Yeah, a lot of it's confirmation. So what'll happen, especially with my glazes, I will take a glaze and I will mess with it for a very long time, and then off of my experiences in firing, I'll have a hypothesis. And I'll go, regardless of other people's information at this point.
Right.
Like, I don't know any... Before I took the classes, I was doing this, but I'll be like, I don't think that works that way. You know, like, everyone online... Which is a crazy sentence in the pottery community. You got to be careful. Facebook groups are wild out here. They'll just say stuff with no proof whatsoever. I'm telling you. I'll do a lot of that, and then I'll go, I don't think they're correct. And then I'll I'll kind of reevaluate. Like, one thing was, again, Sue McLeod talked about specific gravity.
Yeah.
I, for a long time, without knowing anything else about specific gravity, was like, I think Randy's red is changing color based on the amount of water I put in it. Mm-hmm. Which, to a chemist, is a no duh.
Oh, right.
Right? But I didn't know I was making glazes. And then Sue told me, like, oh, yeah, what's your specific gravity? And I'm like, what? And she goes, your water should be treated as if it's an ingredient. And it matters to how thick the application goes on the pot, and then...
Dude, that statement in and of itself is like Eureka moment. Like, thinking about water as an ingredient. Because when I started making... Not formulating my own glazes, but when I was taking already made glazes and making them at home, my mentor, who kind of taught me how to make glazes, already had a recommendation for how much water to go in there and also what the hydrometer reading should be.
Right.
She didn't use specific gravity, but it's like I kind of had a sense of what to do. But when I started looking at possibly going outside of the resources and the glaze recipes that my mentor provided, I was looking through books and going like, well, how much water do I put in?
Exactly.
What should the hydrometer reading be?
None of the recipes have it on glazes even.
That's insane to me. So I like that statement that water should be treated as an ingredient, because it's like, because that's like a whole ass load of other researching then you have to do as the glaze maker to figure out what the specific gravity needs to be to get the look that is on the,
and you have to test
the test tile, right?
And I was testing these. I was like, my Randy's red is not consistent whatsoever.
Yeah.
It ain't even coming out red. It's coming out blue and purples and yellows. And then after a while, I was like, oh, it needs to be in between like 1.2 and 1.3 specific gravity. And it needs to be held underneath the water for at least 2 seconds and then taken out.
Right.
And then that'll give me real consistency if I do it at this heat. And, but like... I'm telling you, man, these Facebook people are wild. So they're just like, yeah, stick your finger in it, and if you can't see your finger through the glaze, you're good. What?
Well, I mean, like, those are the kinds of techniques that it's like, it reminds me a little bit of how, like, before the thermometer, like, was invented, people who were cooking would basically stick their hand inside the oven and go, yeah, it feels about right. And it's like, okay, sure, that works. Like, we have survived as a species up to the point, sticking our hands in ovens and going, that should be the right cooking temperature. And it kind of works.
It's been kind of working.
Yeah, but we have something that works better.
It hasn't been working. It's been working, and sometimes it works well. And sometimes it doesn't work well. Yeah. But I will say what I'm doing now is working consistently well.
Yes, and I feel like that's the difference.
What I will say as well is after kind of the Eureka moment of water and consistency and specific gravity, I've realized that there's a lot of people who also don't, they are now where I was without specific gravity. So when you go to Glazy and you talk to other glaze makers, just about this is like one of 5 things that makes a good glaze, right? Specific gravity alone, they're just like, what?
Yeah.
There are so many pictures and recipes on Glazy, which is the big network of like glaze makers that put their research and stuff up there, that just straight up do not put specific gravity, the viscosity using a hydrometer, and they do not put the milliliters of water in the recipes. And there's so many comments, and they're sort of like, this glaze isn't working for me, like,
Yeah.
Not only that, just purity of chemicals alone is like, how do I test that?
Yeah.
You just gotta, I don't know. There's specific gravity is, not to go too deep into it, but it's definitely one that, like, you need to get down.
Yeah.
If you're making glazes. You need to know it.
Yeah. And it's simple, too. Like, I would argue in some ways it's easier than even using a hydrometer. Because, like, the issue that I ran into, this is like a small little side thing, but the issue that I ran into sometimes with using the hydrometer is if I wanted to make, like, a small batch, then, like, the hydrometer was too long for the container that I had for the small batch.
That's what she said.
Yeah. Ha. Well.
Sorry.
So it's nice that, like, basically as long as you have at least 100 milliliters of a glaze that you're testing,
at least,
you can test the specific gravity.
Yeah, and it's you need the same equipment that you would need to make a glaze that you would need to test specific gravity. Yeah. It's like a little tube. You don't even need a little tube. You just need to know where 100 milliliters or 50 milliliters is.
Yeah, on a container. But you can buy a graduated cylinder fairly cheaply online, and they're actually probably cheaper than hydrometers. I would think. Yeah.
Well, yeah, they're made of like plastic. I think hydrometers are a little bit more like metal in plastic in like a buoyancy thing.
Yes,
so it floats,
yes.
And there's a method to making it. This is just like, it's a plastic container that has markings on it. Yeah. There you go.
I have a glass one because I wanted to feel like an alchemist. Yeah.
I really want an alchemist setup, but like, what would I
I hella do too.
What do I need it for?
I'm trying to make my studio have an alchemist vibe to it, but it's got a long way to go. But I have little fairy lights on the ceiling,
It
feels
homey, if that helps.
Yeah, that's good.
If you put like a red Minecraft bed in the corner.
Oh my god.
I've been playing Minecraft.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
Oh my god, that's
I got a couple other, I'm not going to say their names because they're out there, but I got a couple Potter friends to let me in their Minecraft server.
Fun! That's great.
And like I've built a giant glaze library, and I'm like, this is your level. And so I'm putting a lot of glaze information that I'm just not putting on Glazy.
In the Minecraft server? What the hell? I didn't know you could do that.
Well, because like, remember I developed you that glaze, right?
Yeah,
the red glaze?
Yeah.
Okay, so I made a different one. I made a better one, essentially, that I think I'm going to show it to you just so I can give you a reaction. Okay. But, like, I can't put this on Glazy, and this isn't secret knowledge.
Why can't you put it on
Glazy? Realistically, I've been making glazes, and I find information that, much like me hypothesizing things, that works for me personally, and then I sometimes try and share it with the community. Really, and this is not on brand for the podcast right now, I'm sorry. It's really disheartening to form a hypothesis, put glazes together, which is already difficult, weigh them out, the specific gravity, the viscosity, test them underneath certain temperatures, put them on Glazy, figure out the flux ratios, put it in the calculator, figure out the aluminum to silica ratios, figure out the color, and then like put all that information on Glazy only for one nerd with no evidence to the contrary to any of the research that I'm doing to just go, nuh-uh. And there was just there was like one or two people that would just argue with me on Instagram that...
Dude, just ignore them.
I ignore them?
Think about how many people benefit from that information.
They just shit in the ice cream, Lindsay. Like, everyone had I was supplying ice cream to the whole hood.
I think you should still yeah. That's what I think.
You're right. I felt the vibe there. But also, like, it's so weird for me to say something and then I get, like, not a mountain of pushback, but enough pushback. And then I'm like, well, show me your research. Like, what have you found to the contrary? And they have nothing. They just have like, well, my grandpa, who's a Potter from the 70s, said nuh-uh.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, I just don't want to argue with you. And it's easier for me to just like keep the info from you and not argue with you. Because it doesn't benefit me at all to share the information with you. It only benefits me to do my own research and keep it. And I've already been sharing so much info with the community that like, I'm keeping this. You see that? That's nice. I know it's nice.
It's more orange than red, though, I would say.
Yeah, it's more orange than red, but it's because I had a theory that red iron oxide, when it's calcified, being the difference between yellow iron oxide and red iron oxide.
Calcined, I think?
Calcined?
Calcined, because calcified is different. Calcined is when you basically put something like through the kiln, right? Because it's like fired, essentially.
Yeah, I thought calcified was like when you fire something, essentially.
No, that's calcined.
I'm using the wrong word.
Calcified is, I can't remember what it chemically means, but it's basically like when something like solidifies, kind of.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, calcined then.
Right.
So yellow iron oxide is the decalcined version of red iron oxide, right? And I kept using red iron oxide for all my reds, and I really wanted oxidation red.
Yeah.
Really badly, and one day I was like, well, this is a caveman Eureka moment, I suppose. Where I was like,
caveman Eureka moment.
I was like, well, red iron oxide, red, but iron. Yellow iron oxide, yellow, but iron. Isn't yellow just a higher version of red? Like a lighter version of red? Which is not true. Really.
Yeah.
But I used it in a glaze, and it turned out a lighter version of red. And then I was like, okay, so yes. So the answer is yes.
Yeah.
And then I checked with some other people, and they're like, no, it's basically the same exact thing as red iron oxide. And I was like, but it's working better.
Yeah.
So is it purity? Like, what? What? I don't know what you're saying, but like, this is pretty close to red for an oxidation cone 6, which is difficult to do for most people. And it's not like I did it once. Like, I did it like multiple times on multiple clay bodies. Multiple times.
Oh, that's pretty.
You see what I'm saying? Like, this is like 4 different pots I'm showing you.
Bro, you should put this online. That's real nice.
No,
that's real nice. Oh, baby.
Sorry, that's a baby. See what I mean? Yeah. Yeah. Is
it shiny? It's kind of shiny. It's like a matte.
It's more semi-matte.
Semi-matte, yeah.
But I developed it for you, and you're done with shiny. So, like, I was like, I'm not sharing this because, yeah. Anyway.
All right, well, I'll work.
Bringing it back around.
Dear listeners, I'm going to work on him, so I'm going to try and get him to release that glaze for you.
A few of you angered me, and now no one gets ice cream.
Don't listen to those assholes.
Stop with me.
Okay, all right.
God.
So I'm trying to think of a few different like technical eureka moments that I've had.
Yeah.
And there's a few small ones. So, so I've been working on Stein shapes for a long time. This is like kind of it feels basic, you know, it's like one of those things where it's like after you've had the eureka moment, it's like that, you know, like...
You're like, I should have been doing this.
I should have been, yeah.
Yeah.
So I kept trying to figure out like why my Steins didn't look like the Steins that I kept seeing elsewhere. What is it that makes a Stein Steiny, right?
Yeah.
So when I realized like, oh, it's really about the proportion of the width of the rim to the width of the base.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, so if I want to accentuate the Steiny look, and again, admittedly, there's a bunch of different styles of Steins. I'm not saying that this is the one and only Stein.
Right.
But I realized that like, oh, okay, if I want to consistently get this particular style of Steiny shape, I need to be measuring the width of the base and the width of the rim.
Right.
So what I started doing is essentially I wanted to make sure that, okay, I wanted Steins that were like 6.5 inches tall, greenware, like when I'm throwing them.
That's big.
Yeah.
6.5 inches is big.
It's big, yeah. I mean, of course it's true.
I think we can all agree that 6.5 inches is large.
Oh my God.
I think everyone in this room
yeah, yeah, definitely.
right now can agree
6.5 inches is, yeah.
is f***ing huge, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure we all agree.
Oh, yeah, no, we're good.
Thank
we're
you.
good. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so 6.5 inches tall, but I also wanted to make sure that I kept the overall like tall, Steiny proportions, but also that the inside diameter was at least 3 inches, you know, across.
With the foot, with the...
No, at the rim.
At the rim?
At the rim.
Okay.
Because generally I try and make my cups, if not 3 inches wide, just only very slightly narrower than that, because otherwise people can't fit their hands
right
inside. And admittedly, I
wash.
have small hands in general, so there's plenty of people who can't, you know, fit their hands inside my cups to clean them. But I wanted the Steins to, anyway. Long story short, I had to figure out the right combination of height, of interior diameter at the rim, exterior diameter at the rim, and diameter of the rim of the foot. And realizing that it was just about the proportions and then figuring out how to measure those really allowed me to get a consistent style with the Steins. And then from there, it's just been adding like details kind of here and there to accentuate that shape even more. But it's been that was a big thing. This is just a really brief one, so I'll just mention this quickly. But like weighing your clay, like I just did
a YouTube video on that.
Yes, it's so basic, but so many people don't do it.
I hate doing it.
Yeah, I love it because for me, and again, like if you don't, if not, how do I say? If you don't care about consistency, which is fine if you don't, like, you know, it's just like, it not everyone needs to have like 20 cups with the same shape. It's just more like when you get to the point where, or if you get to the point where you want your cups to be consistent, weighing your clay is the first step and it's the most important from there. You know, measuring your stuff, that's the next step, but if you're not starting out with the same amount of clay every time, that consistency is harder to get, takes more time, and makes you less efficient.
I will say, just as a mentality thing, that I fought weighing my clay for a long time because, as we've talked about many things being a scale, I thought it would bring me closer to the scale of production potter, and I was trying to fight that so hard in the past.
Oh.
Where I was like, oh, if I weigh my clay, I'm making things consistent, and consistency is a thing that production potters value.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I don't want to do that. But then, you know, I talked to you and like Tim C.
Yeah.
And John the Potter, and most of you kind of echoed the same thing of like, well, if you make a cup, like 2 or 3 of the same cup, just because you're into it, right, and people like it and it sells out, why wouldn't you just make more of that same cup? Yeah. If people want more of something, supply and demand, you got to give it to them. And so I started to like, well, if they want the same cup, I have to weigh out the clay, figure out what it weighs, and then weigh the clay and then make 2 or 3 of those cups. So now I have like, people like my dragon mugs, I'm making a little bit more of those. People enjoy my like avatar tumblers, like the avatar teacups. I'm like, well, I gotta make like 20 of those every, you know what I mean? So it's, just don't be afraid of the mentality. Yeah. You know, I'm old, so.
Yeah, what is it they say? Boomer isn't just an age, it's a lifestyle. Or it's a mentality. It's not an age, but it's, being a boomer isn't an age, it's a mentality.
I'm just like a cool horny boomer.
That's
but
fair.
Definitely still there, I'm like, new things!
Still goated with the sauce. I know phrases.
I'm cultured internet style.
Culture. Hello, fellow kids.
Do you have any more? Because I have like 2 more maximum.
I've got a couple more.
Okay, give them to me.
Another big breakthrough on like a technical side was figuring out. So since I came from a more like sculptural background with clay, I really struggled to find my own voice with functional work. And I experimented a lot with different techniques, and I basically tried to do screen printing without screen printing. Like I didn't have, or silk screening rather.
Yeah.
So I didn't have like the right stuff to do it. So anyway, I probably could have saved myself a lot of time, but I was like, I'm gonna experiment on my own.
That's where innovation comes. That's good.
That's true, but I could have saved myself some time.
Definitely.
But I think realizing that I could use rubber stamps for surface decoration was big. I have sort of bounced around between different modes of creating. Like I, again, come from a sculptural background, learn how to do more wheel throwing. I didn't necessarily consider myself a 2D artist particularly, but I found that the more that I do, the rubber stamp designs, the more that I'm designing things in Photoshop, I'm sketching things out on my sketchbook. And so I guess I'll just say this isn't very cohesive, but I guess I'll just say...
I think this is all good information.
Okay.
If I was hearing this as a new beginner potter, I would have been taking okay, so I need to try this, this, and this.
Okay, all right.
And that would take me a f***ing year to do. This is a good episode, I think.
Okay, all right. Hopefully it is helpful. So the rubber stamps provided an opportunity to explore 2D surface design, even though I came from a sculptural background. So in terms of looking at what kind of skills you can develop, I guess I'll just say don't be afraid to try things you may not consider yourself necessarily like good at. Like I didn't really, it's really recently that I've even started sharing more of my like drawings, more of my like stuff in my sketchbook. And again, all that's really on my Patreon just because I didn't really consider myself a 2D artist. But the rubber stamps allowed me to explore that more and get better at it, I think.
Yeah, like I silkscreen with my stuff. Yeah. I don't consider myself a silkscreen. Like Tim C is fantastic at drawing his little robots.
Yeah.
I can't draw. You know what I mean? Like I can't draw. I pay someone to make silkscreen images that other people make for me, and then I put them on cups.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Like I can't do that. But if you can find a path like Lindsey has, where she's like, I made something and I can make a stamp out of it and integrate that into my work. Go ahead. Don't box yourself into only ceramicist.
Yeah. Oh my god, I'm gonna have to bleep that out. Plenty of bleep.
Yeah. One giant eureka moment that I had was that soon after I started making glazes, I realized after so many hours of... Because I started I can make my own clay too, right? I don't make my own clay. But I realized very quickly that clay is also just a recipe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because of that, it affects the chemistry of your glazes and how you work with your clay as well. And this is one of the reasons why I always test my glazes on white and brown clay, is because brown or red clay rather has a certain amount of iron in it and is, for lack of a better term, usually less pure. Usually comes with a bit of grog or sand in it. As for porcelain, like pure porcelain or white clay, usually has some type of talcum powder or talc base in it. That's changing now, but in a general sense, that's what it is. But because they're made out of two different recipes, let's just say one has 20% EPK and another one has
EPK is Edwin Plastic Kaolin.
Edgar
Plastic. Thank you. Edgar Plastic Kaolin. I'm like Edwin. Edwin sounds cooler.
Edwin does sound. It sounds like an alchemist made it.
It is actually. It's an evil character from the Baldur's Gate series.
And you discovered the Kaolin Mountain.
Yes.
But you start to realize that clay is just a recipe, much like glaze is, and because glaze is so dependent on its chemistry to come out different translucencies or has different alumina ratios or silica ratios, clay has the same stuff, right? So those chemistries work together. When I started testing my glazes when I realized that eureka moment, I started testing all my glazes on brown clay as well. Like my new red glaze turns real good red on redstone clay because there's a bit more iron in it.
Yeah.
Right? But like on white clay, it looks a bit like light red or orangish. Mm-hmm. But like the second you realize that clay is also chemistry and that affects your glazes, you start thinking like, well, how can my glazes change if I use different clay bodies?
Yeah.
And your testing just opens up.
Oh my God. See, to me, that sounds like intimidating, because part of the question was also, how do you recommend artists kind of find those breakthrough moments? And part of me is like, well, I think it's just about continuing to experiment. But also, I think there gets to be this point where it's like, when you do realize how much you don't know and how much experimentation you really can do, I think a lot of it is figuring out what you want to spend your time on.
Yes.
And knowing that just because you don't want to spend your time researching one particular thing doesn't mean you're any less of a ceramic artist.
Yeah, of course.
I definitely had that feeling of like, oh, I need to work up to using porcelain. You know, I felt embarrassed when people would ask me what kind of clay I used, and I'd say, oh, you know, be mixed with grog, you know, like as though that was not good enough, you know? So, yeah, basically.
I'm a monster. I'm just like, I use whatever clay I want to.
Yeah.
Because I can.
Yeah.
Because I know the chemistry now.
yeah. Which is a power move in and of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's I saw that door open a little bit, and I'm like, nope. No, thank you.
Well, what you generally do, or at least what I generally did after that step, is I started to realize what clays are desirable for my glazes and the workability of my stuff. And then I just stick to like 4, maybe 5 clay bodies now.
Yeah, and that's even like a lot. Like
usually most people stick with 2 or 3 maximum.
Mm-hmm. And it is okay to like amend what I just said, like in terms of working with different clays and stuff. It's okay to walk in that door a little bit, and I think that like opening the door is important.
Yeah.
But you don't have to like continue down that road. So like if you try out a couple different clays, realize that you don't want to keep experimenting and you go back to what you're doing before, that is also okay. And for you, again, like you're working with 5 different clay bodies, so that in and of itself opens up other opportunities for you to have eureka moments.
Right.
It's kind of like a skill branch. Like within games, you learn fire, then fire, then fire ga, and then,
Fire-raga.
Fire-raga.
Well, there's certain things that like the juice is worth the squeeze, and some things are not. Like there's some things I'm not gonna learn how to do. Mm-hmm. There's like chattering. I don't care for chattering anymore.
Fair.
I just don't, and I don't want to find the different variations of chattering. They're not cool enough for me anymore. And because of that, like, I'm not gonna learn how to use a Steve's tool really well, because a Steve's tool is just like a wheel that chatters for you. Oh. I'm just not. There's certain things that I'm like, I did it once. I dipped my toe in the water. I don't feel like swimming in that. Mm-hmm. It's not worth my time, my effort. Just for me personally. Some people make entire careers off of like a tool, and that's all of them. Go for it.
Yeah.
But like, there's certain things that I'm just like, meh.
Yeah. Are there other things that you can think of in terms of like how people could kind of find their way to eureka moments? And I guess overall, how would you describe how you found yours? Again, like more organic or more like study oriented? I guess like both.
I would say a lot of my eureka moments came from the fact that I did a lot of research and studying, and then I did a lot of experimentation, but I had no confirmation of those things. And the second I found someone, like Matt Katz, I found someone, Rat and Rose Katz rather, someone that echoed what I already thought, I was like, yes!
Yeah.
Like I was on the, like not only was I on the right path, this person just confirmed what I already thought. But it's difficult to find those sources because number one, there's not a lot of them in the pottery world.
Yeah.
And number two, the ones that are there are like, I know I harken on the Facebook groups a lot, but there's a lot of Facebook groups that are just like people who tell each other old husband and wife tales of pottery. That like, oh yeah, I met this one potter in Apple Hill, and he put 1% copper in there, and then a squirrel ate out of it, and he died. And you're like, what?
Yeah.
And then I meet, like an actual glaze chemist at Eureka, and he's like, no, that's ridiculous. Who told you that? And I'm like, Facebook. And he's like, okay, well, don't go there.
No, Facebook is okay to go to. It's just knowing that...
You gotta pick and choose, which you...
Yeah, like be aware that there can be misinformation that spreads, Because, I mean, again, like, Clay Buddies is an awesome Facebook group that has like a really strong and active community for learning stuff. That's actually kind of something that I was thinking about in terms of like how to come to Eureka moments, is I think can sometimes be a combination of doing stuff on your own, but also having some kind of community to either share things, or like it's important to talk to other people about the clay things. Or about non-clay things, like for when we do the next episode, because we've talked so much about the technical Eureka moments that we're going to go into the emotional or non-technical Eureka moments next episode.
I don't have any emotional stuff for you.
You do. I know you do, because...
I'll share it with Lindsey.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I'm going to make him share it with all of you.
I'm going to cry next time.
We're going to be openly weeping.
Yep.
You're just going to hear like really uncomfortable mouths and like no sounds. Oh God, don't. I'm going to have to hear that editing. And that's it for today. Thank you for listening to The Mud Peddlers with Lindsey M Dillon.
And Donte of Earth Nation.
Want to say hi and see what Donte and I are working on in our studios? Check out the show notes for links to our websites and social media below. You can find me at lindseymdillon.com. That's LINDSEY, M as in monster, DILLON.com. And on Etsy, Instagram, and Facebook at Lindsey M Dillon.
And you can find me at Earth Nation Ceramics. It's spelled exactly how you think it's spelled, but you can also find me on my Facebook fan page and Instagram at the same name at Earth Nation Ceramics.
If you enjoyed hanging out with us today, or you have a question or topic you'd like us to discuss, take a second to rate and review the Mud Peddlers in Apple Podcasts. It helps our podcast reach new listeners, and we really appreciate the feedback. Thanks again, and we'll catch you next time.